If you have been following along with Hannah and I on making the Stepping Stones quilt, today is a great day. We have the final quilt steps and the final quilt for you.
Yeah, so keep watching.
Hi, it's Fran Morgan and
Hannah Johnson
with Fabric Cafe, and today is such a special day. We are so excited.
Yes, I am very excited. I'm almost anxious, you might say, because the end is in sight. So I want to get in there and I want to finish my quilt because it's so close. I can almost taste it.
It's looking amazing.
Now, if you do end up quilting along with us, post your pictures to Facebook. Let us know. Let us see.
I would love
see your
that.
stuff. Or if you do it in different fabrics and you just want to use the same pattern and use the same steps.
That's a great idea.
You can do whatever you want.
Yeah, we just love to see everyone's quilting. Yeah. And it's really special that, Hannah, this is your second quilt that you've made. Mm-hmm. And so it's just incredible. She's just done an amazing job. Now let's take a look at the quilting.
Okay.
And it looks like here you did these fun like bubbles on the surface. Is that the quilt pattern that you chose?
Yeah, it was called Champagne Bubbles. And so we chose this. She sent me 2 colors of thread also to look at. And she sent me a light green and a dark green. And I really liked the dark green one. And I just think it popped up so well on the fabric.
It looks amazing. It is just, I'm so excited for you to finish it so I can see it. But it looks great. So we've got it back from the quilter, the long arm quilter. So now what we need to do is get it trimmed up so that we can get the binding on.
Perfect.
All right, so first steps on getting it trimmed, let's open it up.
Okay.
And yep, needs to be flat on a surface. Now, if you're at home and you don't have a wonderful cutting table like we have here at Fabric Cafe, I know whenever I quilt at home, I use my dining room table with my mat because it's a nice large surface to keep it flat. So that's smart. Is a good tip. And then we have and I love this for straightening the edges after it's quilted. It's one of these huge 16.5-inch squares. So it really helps, because of its size, to get a good square on the corners.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with one corner. So if you're at home, get it on the table on 1/4. Make sure your mat's under there.
Don't cut your table.
That's a good boy, right?
I could totally see myself doing that.
I've been scared a few times when I would just roll off the mat a little bit. I would be, no, not the table, not the table. Okay, and we're going to line it up. Now, a couple of little things that I do whenever I use the square. I do use the seam right here on the border to line up one of the lines. Now, it's not necessarily lined up on an inch line. It could be lined up on a 1/4 or a 1/2 or something like that. And then watch it over here as well.
Okay.
Okay.
And then do I push it all the way into
all the way to the edge. So a good starting point would be this corner block. So if you look at it and you can see, if you're at 3 1/8 on this side, you want to be 3 1/8 on that side as well. Let's line it up at the 3-inch mark first, just as an example.
Okay.
Okay, so you can see that here's my 3-inch and here's my 3-inch. And both of those lines are directly on the seam line. But it looks like we have plenty of extra at the top. So let's bump it to, say, 3 1/8. Okay, now where does it fall? It looks like you've got a little extra there, and maybe even a little extra there.
But it's not excessive. Okay, and it's okay to get that. Whenever I thought about trimming it, I was nervous about trimming that outside seam off. In my head, I was thinking, I have to keep that seam there to keep it all together. But everything is quilted down, so it's all connected.
I think the main goal for me whenever I trim my quilts.
Trim those too if you want.
Not Scottish. Is to just make sure they're square so that whenever they hang pretty and they're not curling under or anything like that. Now, something else I want to mention here as well. it's pulling just a little bit because we have the weight of the quilt hanging off the edge of the table. So I think it would be a better idea. I'm just going to reach down here, so forgive me for a minute, and kind of support this weight so that we can make sure that we're shifting just a little bit and that this is completely square. Now, when we lined this up, we put it at 3 1/8 and 3 1/8, right? Okay, so when we do that, we want to make sure that it stays at 3 1/8 for the most part, all the way down. I'm not really tugging and pulling because I don't want to force it to go that direction. I want it to lay flat and I want it to be relaxed.
Okay.
And then we line it up and get the most straight edge as we can. Keep it along that seam line the best we can. There's going to be a little bit of fudge, and that's okay. And don't forget, we're lining it up on this side as well as on this side.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll start here. So what I would encourage you to do is let's just cut like halfway,
Okay.
and let's cut our corner, and then we'll get our long ruler.
Okay. And we just use a rotary cutter, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. This is an interesting. Okay, so here.
Yes. Very nice. Once again, Hannah is an expert at using the full body cutting method, which I love.
It's the only way I can get it straight and apply enough pressure.
Right. All right. So that's awesome.
Ha-ha!
So if you want to just take your rotary cutter and kind of split that and cut it so that it's easier to manage, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like this is definitely a project you change your rotary blade after.
Yes. In fact, I would suggest changing your rotary blade before just to make sure it's nice and crisp and ready to go. So now what we're going to do is let's just kind of shift the entire quilt a little bit, and we're going to take our straight edge. Once again, I'm going to try to keep most of the bulk of this up on the table. This seems a little clumsy, but honestly, when you start doing it, I think you'll understand why we do it the way we do it. Okay, I'm going to let's shift our large ruler off. Same thing. So we lined up on the 3 1/8 mark, and we're going to just continue that all the way down with our long ruler.
Okay.
Okay, so
I see.
when we line up here at 3 1/8, it should be perfectly at this edge. Okay, and look, it really looks nice and clean now. Just kind of, because these do wiggle a little bit. And it looks like, you see that there?
Okay, yeah. So you start there in the corner with your 3 1/4 like we did with the square.
Right.
And then you follow along with the seam.
Right.
Oh, that's not so
Very
bad.
simple. And just remember to keep the bulk of the weight of the quilt supported so it's not pulling and it's relaxed.
That also makes sense.
Okay. So do you think you can handle that to finish that
I
up?
think so. So I just keep on trimming and then keep on shuffling it up and moving the ruler down. And when I get to my next corner, use a square again.
That's it.
All right.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. I think I can
that.
do that.
Hannah, so how did it go with trimming your quilt?
It went really well. It was surprisingly easy. Like, it was much easier than I anticipated. It looks
that's so
really
good.
daunting with all of the excess on the side, but it went really fast.
Good.
Way faster than I expected.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That is great. Okay, so it's trimmed. Let's start with binding.
So, Fran, I have a question for you. So I know we do an economy binding, but I've also heard things, about single fold and flange binding. Why do we do an economy for our quilts?
So we do an economy binding for our quilts because we are trying to utilize every bit of 3 yards. So we kind of just did the single fold economy binding just because we wanted to get the biggest quilt out of the fabric allotted, the 3 yards.
Okay.
So we've chosen just to do a single fold. Now, personally, I actually prefer a single fold over a double fold. I personally think it's a little easier to manage, and I have quilts that are quite old, and the single fold is holding up great. So
So no troubles there.
none whatsoever. Okay, so I see that you have over here your 1 1/4 inch strips already cut for binding.
Yes, and I have them already sewn together.
Oh, awesome.
Those at home. you take your strips and you sew them end to end, and you know, make one big thing, just like you do your borders. And so for sake of time, I read ahead and I went ahead and did that part because I knew how to do that, and you've seen me do borders, so you know how to do it too.
You can do it too. So it's just cut straight at grain, normal. We also are doing our joinings straight and not at an angle. I know some people, or maybe that's an old, long ago kind of thing where people were doing angled bindings.
Really? Interesting.
So actually, I wouldn't mind seeing a seam just for a moment. Let's just show everyone. I know that I'm throwing a kink in our little process here, but I think it's kind of important. So we've just got it straight here, and then when we start pressing this, we will press this open.
Okay.
And the reason why I prefer to press open is because it distributes the weight, the bulk on both sides, and it makes it even.
Oh.
And then once we sew this binding down, there's not going to be any stress on that seam whatsoever, so that'll take care of that. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to press our binding in half, wrong sides together, the length of the binding.
Okay.
So we're just going to match these raw edges like this and press. So that's step one.
Okay.
Now before we start pressing, I want to mention something that's really kind of handy. We have what we call a thermal thimble. And what these are is they're just little silicone coverings that you can put on over your fingers, and that one is not big enough for my finger. They do come in multiple sizes in the package, which is super helpful. But what this does is this helps your fingers from getting hot from the steam and getting burned. So these are super helpful whenever you're pressing things like binding, because you're so close and it's so small that it'll protect your fingers.
Oh, good to know. That is a helpful tip.
So here, we'll just move these over here if you want to give those a shot.
Okay.
Okay, so wrong sides together, matching raw edges.
Okay. I'm gonna flip this over to this side.
I would do the same thing.
Okay, cool. It felt right based on like seams, like doing seams and pushing this direction.
Yep. I do the same thing. I will flip it around to the right way. So we'll just take our iron, and now we do have a steam iron. Do have the water in our iron for steam, but also whenever we do binding, I do recommend using something like Mary Ellen's Best Press to give it a nice crisp finish and help it to hold its shape as you're binding the end at the end, so it'll keep it in place.
So would you suggest after I do this part, go ahead and give it a squirt?
I would, definitely. Good idea. Okay, so we've got a small section here just so that you can see, pressed in half, wrong sides together. Now what we're going to do is we're going to open it back up, which seems backwards, but trust me. So we have that nice crisp press line in the middle. We're going to take one raw edge and press it to the fold. So basically exactly like that. Okay.
Oh, okay.
And you're going to match that fold line.
And then press that?
And then press that.
Okay.
And see how handy those thermal thimbles are.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I was like, woo, my finger is so close to the tip of the iron.
And that first press line that we put in gives you a great guide to fold that into. So it's very helpful. I always do that step. I never skip it. Okay, very nice. And then we're going to fold the folded edge over again.
Oh.
So just like that's correct. And basically it should automatically want to go back where you first press it. So it's almost like it's folded again where you first pressed and where you first folded.
It's just getting it.
Right. And then we press that again. That looks fantastic.
So then we have about a 1/4 inch left over.
Exactly. So this is the side we'll be sewing onto the quilt. But let me go ahead and let you finish pressing that. And then we will talk about getting it onto the edge of the quilt.
Okay.
So now it's time to start sewing the binding on the quilt.
Yes.
So I have done a few samples here just to show you how this works and hopefully make it easier and clearer to understand when you start sewing your binding on.
Good. Because this is the part that I think I'm probably of the whole binding process, I think this is the part that I'm most nervous about.
And you know, you've done great so far. You've got your binding sewn together. You've pressed it so well.
Thank you.
This is going to be easy peasy once you get going. It's not going to be a problem.
Perfect.
So as I said, these are just some examples of what we've got here. And here is our economy binding. It's all pressed, and we're pretending that this is a quilt.
Right.
Okay. And when you start to do this, we're going to start in the middle of the quilt on the long edge. That's how I prefer to start. And whenever we sew the binding on, it's also my preference to use a 1/4 inch foot. Now, there's something neat about a 1/4 inch foot that I want to share with you and everyone out there as well. And I'm going to just use a little pointer here so you can see. All right, the 1/4 inch foot, of course, we know that from the edge of the foot here and on this side is a 1/4 inch from these edges to the center.
Oh, okay.
But there's also something really cool about a 1/4 inch foot. It has a notch here and a notch here, and then the same notches on the other side of the foot. This first notch that's right up next to the needle shows you where your needle is going to land in the fabric. So it's kind of like a guide. Can you see that little triangle notch right there? The second notch, which is further out on the foot, tells you when you're a 1/4 inch away from the edge.
Oh.
So I'm just going to kind of put this on the edge of the fabric. So if your foot was right here when you're sewing on this outside notch, then you know that you have a 1/4 inch from the raw edge to your needle.
Okay, that's very helpful.
So
that's cool.
The sewing machine feet are great tools to help us get perfect binding.
Yeah.
So in knowing that, you can use that as you're going. Okay.
Cool.
So now let's get back to our sample. So we have our binding strip. We're starting in the middle of the long edge, and we're going to sew the right side of the binding to the right side of the quilt.
Okay.
Now, what I like to do whenever I begin sewing my binding is I like to just fold this in under a little bit. I usually just do a 1/4 inch finger press it and start sewing. So I have another sample to show. So I'm going to move this one out of the way. And we're going to show this. So as you can see here, I've started sewing and I folded that and just sewed over that edge.
Now, why do you do that, Fran?
Because whenever I come back around, and I'm going to go all the way around my quilt, I'm going to come back and I'm going to take the end after I've come all the way around, and I'm going to overlap this just a bit.
Okay.
And so whenever I do that, this will fold over, and you're going to have I'm trying to use this little pointer to help. You'll see that it kind of finishes that edge off nicely.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. It's not two raw edges meeting together.
Right, and it's, to me, it's something that I do on mine. I just think it's much simpler than to try to make those match and sew and all that stuff.
Yeah, I think that's okay. That sounds good. Makes sense to me.
All right. So we've started sewing with this turned under. Let me just mention too, I did use a darker thread here just for the example so that you can see it well. A 1/4 inch from the edge, we've sewn down. I want you to stop about an inch out. Okay. And then I want you to take your fabric and fold it this way. And believe me, this will get to be second nature. I know it's a little confusing now whenever you just start. So your needle's out here. Stop with your needle in the down position so it's holding all of your fabric layers. Fold this, and you see how it makes a nice little triangle? And then what I do is I take my thumbnail and I crease it.
Okay.
Okay. Then you can unfold it, and this crease will be here. You see that crease? And you can also use the notch on your foot. Then you will continue to sew, because you're about an inch out, down to that crease.
Okay.
And the notch should line up.
Gotcha. So it's like
guide.
a double guide.
Yes.
Oh, okay, cool.
Then working with your needle down, lift your presser foot, pivot, and sew along that crease to make that 45-degree angle. Can you see that right there?
Okay, so you said you keep the needle down?
I keep the needle in the down position.
So that you can move it and it doesn't...
Yes. You can pivot to the quilt because there's going to be some weight to your quilt. So you want to make sure that all those layers are held securely while you're working with it. Go slow, take your time. Okay, so we've sewn along this 45 to the edge. You're going to cut your thread at that point.
Do you do a back stitch before you do that?
In this case, I do not, and I'll explain why in just a moment.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so we're going to take the quilt out of the machine. After we take it out of the machine, break your thread. We're going to fold it back this way. And then we're going to fold it back this way so that the edge of the binding lines up to the edge of the quilt. And you see how it kind of makes a little square here? Okay, we're going to put the quilt back in the machine at 1/4 inch and start sewing on the edge.
Okay.
So I don't backstitch that because this seam is going to hold it.
Oh, got it.
Okay, now I'm going to turn and I'm going to show you what I've done here. All right. So do you see how I've started? Let's get that little thread out of the way. I've just started at the end and I've just started sewing a straight line.
Just like you did on the other.
And so that really makes that corner nice and secure.
Okay.
All right. And then you'll just keep going to the next corner.
Okay.
All right.
Could we unfold this little, can I look at that? So it just makes a pretty corner.
It does. So whenever you take that and press that to the other side, it's going to be beautiful.
Okay. Wow.
Okay.
That is way simpler than I thought.
All right. And I'm going to sit with you through your first corner as well because I want you
Thank you.
I want to be there because I know that it's a little trickier than just straight seams and all of that stuff. But your foot's going to help. You know, finger pressing, it's going to help, and you got this. It's so easy.
Okay.
Okay, so we are at the machine, and we are going to start sewing this binding.
Yes. Okay, so a couple things before we get going. Do you use pins or clips or anything like that?
I don't. I actually prefer not to. I just sew the binding on very slowly and take my time with it. And I have not found a problem. As long as you're working with your needle in the down position, it's holding your layers, and then you can adjust if you need to stop and adjust.
Gotcha. Okay. It makes sense, honestly, like looking at it, it's really easy, like even easier than when you're sewing your pieces together to see and feel if it is still in line. Because you've got like this bulky quilt, or at least a thicker quilt, and your thin fabric, so.
Right.
Okay.
And then also just want to mention, in this case, I would probably match the thread to the binding.
Oh, okay.
So I see here that our binding fabric is basically white with a print on it. So we've got a white thread in the machine.
Perfect.
Okay.
Awesome.
So we're going to start not quite in the middle here, but just so that I can sit with Hannah and we can go through that corner. So she's going to get going. We'll get the machine lined up.
Okay. So first off, you fold it over, right?
That's correct. Now, whenever I fold it over like that, usually I open the binding and do the fold with it. There you go. And then fold it. So I kind of open the binding as I go because we don't want it to get caught up in the seam allowance.
Okay, that makes sense because then it's got to go foop.
Correct.
Okay.
You got it. All right.
I speak in sound effects. You've been with me long enough, you know.
I understand those. Grunts and groans and.
Okay, but let me finger press it a little bit more.
Okay, and you can also go ahead and line your. Go ahead and lower the presser foot and put the needle in the down position and then sew over the end. I also tend to do that.
Oh, okay.
So if you wanted to go ahead and start, and there is some bulk to the quilt, so sometimes whenever we're doing this, that does add a little bit of, it's just bulky, it's heavy, there's some weight there, so just be aware of that.
Do you think I'm too far away? Should I start closer?
Nope, I think that is just fine.
Okay. I had to wake up.
Yep. All right.
I'm going to slow down just a little bit.
Okay. That's always a great tip. When you're doing something for the first time with quilting, always slow your machine down.
I think that's my favorite thing about this machine. The knob is just right there and it's a little lever. Oh, it's the coolest thing.
And then those of us that have been doing this for a while, we're little speed demons and we just sew like crazy. And then we have to go back and rip it out sometimes.
That's my goal when I'm doing projects and things. Not to have to seam rip.
Right. Yep. That's my goal too. It happens sometimes. All right, you're doing great. Just want to mention to everyone also when you're doing this, try not to pull or stretch your binding when you're sewing it. Just allow it to feed through at the natural pace of the machine. So you don't want to pull it. All right.
Okay.
Very good. Excellent. And we're getting kind of close to that corner, so why don't we go ahead and stop and do that little folding trick.
And you keep the foot down?
Right.
Okay.
Now you're folding it at a 90 degree, so you want, okay.
Oh, please
Sorry.
help me.
Okay, so I'm just going to do a little trick here. So you basically want to fold this so that this edge right here of the binding is straight with this edge.
Okay,
That's
so
the
it goes
90
more
degree.
like that.
I'm going to unfold it and have her practice.
Oh. Well, and also it was helpful seeing you do it again with the machine because I saw your finger kind of like guided it to the foot of the machine. So they're almost, I guess it'll be different depending on where you stop if you're
That's
not exactly an inch or, you know, because who knows if I am.
Okay.
Okay.
So then at this point, I kind of give that crease a little finger press so that it creates kind of a line there. And then you can open it back up. And your binding is going to be open. Can you see that crease there? All right, so we're going to sew to that crease. And also you can use your little notches on each side of your foot. You get a 1/4 inch out. We're going to stop and sew the angle. Okay,
so I turn it like this?
Yes, so you can lift your presser foot. The needle will stay in the fabric. That's working with the needle down. Turn to the quilt, and then you're going to sew on the angle.
Okay. Okay, yeah, and it is on the angle. Okay. Do I have to put my presser foot back down?
Yes. All right, and then sew to the corner. Very good. Now you can cut the thread. Yay! First half done.
Okay.
Very nice. Okay.
How's that looking? Does that look okay?
That looks perfect. Okay. So now we're going to, and I want to just for everybody out there, if you have a chair or something that you can put behind your sewing machine to help hold the weight of the quilt, that is very helpful in this case. Because sometimes just the weight of the quilt can pull and throw us off. So that's something to keep in mind when you're working.
We have a Natalie behind ours.
We do. I wish you could see. She's helping so much. Okay. So now we need to do the rest of the corner.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have here. Now we're going to fold it back the way you did initially. So remember how we lined up the edges.
It's amazing how I literally just was shown how to do this. And I'm like, how do I do this?
Okay.
Ow.
So our edges are lined up, right? Very good. Now kind of hold that fold and then fold it back over itself.
Okay.
There you go. And then line up those raw edges. Great. Now we're just going to start at the end, at the edge of the quilt, and just start sewing a 1/4 inch line.
Okay. Yes.
We just sew over the end and just keep going with that 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, this is looking fantastic, and we're doing great. So, Hannah, do you think that you can keep going and sew the next corner?
I think so. I think it's pretty straightforward.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. I'll tell you what, I will let you work on this. Just take your time.
Okay.
Remember, though, not to pull on your binding, and try to support the quilt as much as you can as you're going. Okay. And I think you got it.
Awesome.
Hannah, I see that you have all of the bindings sewn on. It looks great.
Thank you.
So now it's time to do the handwork.
It is. Now, I have a confession to make.
Okay.
I actually have been doing hand binding for Fabric Cafe. I started doing that pretty pretty soon after I started working here. But it's the only quilting thing I knew before doing this series, so.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's actually great that you have some knowledge.
Yeah, which is nice. It did help knowing, I guess, technical terms and things like that along the way. But I've been taught how to do it Donna's style and the way she does it. So if you're interested in that, she has a whole video on economy binding called Economy Binding Tips. So check that out. But today, we're going to look at how Fran does her binding because you do it slightly different.
Yep, I'm a little bit unique, I guess, in that way.
Yeah, which is really cool because even everyone watching out there, they all have their own style and everyone has slight quirks. Like I probably don't do it exactly like Donna taught me because I've been doing it and you find your flow.
That's true. You kind of get in your groove on what is best for you and what works for you and whether you're right-handed or left-handed or the lighting or your bifocals or whatever happens to be the environment that you're in. It does make a little bit different. So there's lots of different
to watch or listen to while you do your binding.
Oh my goodness, yes. So there's all kinds of circumstances that create favorable conditions and lots of different ways to do it, and it still looks great. So we are here to kind of step through how to do this the way that I do it.
Yeah.
And show you some of the things that are options for you to use while you're doing your binding on your quilt. So whenever I bind, I usually start in the middle of a straight edge. But in this case, we're going to start down at the end just so I can show you a corner as well. So I'm actually going to kind of just fold this down here. And the first thing I do, even before I pick up the needle, is I actually use 2 straight pins, and I like these flat flower head pins for this. And whenever I hold my quilt to bind, I actually hold it away from me, like this. And I'm going to be using my needle this way.
Oh, that's interesting because I go the opposite direction.
It is a little different. So what I'm going to do is fold the binding over to the wrong side. I'm going to match the folded edge with the stitch line. Now that stitch line is the one that you put in whenever you sew the binding on. And then I'm going to place my pin to hold that binding down. Now I'm placing it so that whenever I use my needle and I'm sewing, the flat part of the pin, the blunt end, is towards me and the pointy is away. That way when I'm binding, I'm not accidentally poking myself. Yes.
No blood on the quilt.
And I do tend to hopscotch these pins. So I'll do 2 and I'll put it in, and then whenever I get close, I'll take it and move it to the next, forward position. Okay, so we're going to just start with the 1, and then I'll put this one in just a minute. So the next thing I do after I get my first 2 pins in place, is I'll need to get my needle and thread.
Okay.
So I know that you may be familiar. We do have binding needles, which are specific needles just for binding. Do you use these?
I do use them, and I actually use them maybe longer than you're supposed to because they get kind of bendy, and then I like the flexible nature of it. I think it falls through really easily, and I like when it kind of bends to my finger.
Yep.
After use. I think that happens to a lot of needles. I don't know, I'm not that informed on needles.
Some are stiffer than others. And binding needles are interesting because they're very long. They do have a little bit of bend to them, so it allows you to get a good grasp of them and do that little running stitch.
Yeah, I feel like it kind of, the bend helps you get through there.
Yep, I think you're right. So the next thing is thread. So we have our needle here.
Now, when you pick your thread for your quilts, what do you usually look at? Because since we're doing a blind stitch, you're not going to see it. But I guess in my experience, if I see it at all, I usually see it on my backing. So how do you choose your thread?
So usually I try to choose a color that blends with the backing. Now on your case, we have lots of different colors, which is great, but it does have a white base, so I think the white thread is going to work well. And also the binding has quite a bit of white in it, so I think it's really going to hide that. If I were to do a quilt and I had let's say a dark background, like a dark blue, and my binding was white, I would probably try to find the dark blue. And then if I didn't have it, because sometimes if I don't have it in my stash, I go with my second choice, which would be the white.
Hey,
I know that sounds crazy, but it is a blind stitch, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you don't end up seeing it.
Okay, I'm just going to clip off a little bit of thread here with my scissors.
It really does blend quite well.
It does.
When you pulled it out, I couldn't even see the thread anymore.
And then one other thing I want to mention is you want to thread the end that comes off the spool first. I mean, the end that comes off the spool first is what you thread through the needle. Did I say that right?
I think so.
Okay.
Makes sense to me.
So whenever you pull it off, it's the end that you grab to pull it off. Because thread actually has a direction to it. It's wrapped usually. And if you do it backwards, it tends to tangle more than. So it's just a little tip there. Okay, so bad habit. I lick the end of my thread. I also heard a trick that you could lick the needle and that maybe that was easier, but give that a shot and see which one do you like better.
Yeah, do you lick the needle or the thread?
Yeah, do you lick the needle or the thread? I don't know. Let's see if I can do this on camera.
Oh, yeah.
And then we just thread that through. And then of course I leave a longer end. And then I just do a little overhand knot and create at the end. So I have about a 1/4 inch at the end. I don't measure that. If it's longer, it's fine. If it's shorter, it's fine. As long as there's just a little bit of a knot in there.
You do a much nicer knot than me. I do the whole lick your finger and then wrap the thread around it and kind of bunch it up and pull. And the power of saliva.
We all have our styles, right? And that's great. I mean, whatever works for you. Okay, so I've already got my pen in here. So one of the things that I do is I go and I put my needle on the wrong side of the stitch line. So this is going to be right next to the edge of the quilt. And I do a little anchoring trick. See, that just went through. I need to do that again. So whenever I feel it catch, I stop. And then I do just a tiny little stitch right there and then loop it back through just as an extra anchor. Then I will grab just a little bit of the binding right on the fold. And I'm going to move this pin up. And then I grab a little bit of the quilt backing just on the other side of that stitch line. And if there's any little loose threads along the way, I usually tuck them into my binding. I'm grabbing just a small amount, probably not even a 1/4 inch on each little bite that I take with my needle. But I just keep going.
I like calling them bites.
Is that the right term?
I haven't heard it called that. I think it's cute. It's like you're taking little nibbles along the way.
Well, that's true.
That's fun.
All right, and I'm just going to keep going now. I started really close to a corner because I want to be able to show you. Okay, so whenever I get to the corner, okay, so if we were to open this up, it's going to be flat, and then I just fold the other over to the seam line, and it should match up. And then, once again, I always put my pin where it won't stab me.
Right.
Whenever I'm going forward. And, you know, is this kind of like watching water boil? You watching me bind?
Well, it's actually very soothing. It's it's
okay.
kind of like I don't know. It's going through so smoothly.
It really does, and I think that I have always sewn away from me like this, and I'm not sure why. I hold in my lap the same way. It's kind of away from me.
I'm very interested because corners are the most challenging thing of binding.
Right.
And I always find, since I go this way and then come down, I always find not the corner the most difficult part, but actually the section like right below, because it's the most awkward, because I haven't turned my quilt yet to go this way, which I suppose I could. but I do it just like right at the corner like that.
Yeah.
So this might be an easier
okay
method.
So
Who knows?
I'm going to pull the pin so you can see. So normally I would try to keep it in there. So I am my needle is coming right up at the next stitch line on this side. Okay, so I am going to take just one little bite out of the binding on this side. Then I'm going to fold this down so that it makes that nice mitered corner. And then I'm going to take a very small bite out of the opposite edge. Did you see how I did that? Then what I do is I go back and do a small little bit just right there so that it folds nicely. And then I'm going to turn this. And I'm going to do another little small bite on the new folded edge. And just to kind of anchor that. And then once again, I'm going to start going down that side.
And just going back and forth on the quilts, then in through the loop of the binding.
Yes. And of course, I would go back in and put my pin in. And basically, I hopscotch my pin. So I use two, I put one in. When I get to it, I move it past the next one and then just keep bumping them down, bumping them down.
Yeah.
Just like that.
Okay, so what do you do to tie off your thread? Because, I mean, obviously this piece of thread is not going to last the entire quilt.
That's a great question. So let's work on that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mimic that for you. So I'm going to cut this thread.
Okay.
So it's short. And so we're kind of at the end. Now you can see there I probably have like 6 inches or so. So I will go in, I'm going to take one more stitch on both. And then I would go in, and when my thread's done, I go in and take a tiny little stitch on the quilt part. And then I will do one more tiny little stitch, and then I'll loop it through to make a knot.
Gotcha.
Then what I do is I'll go in, and on my seam allowance, I will weave the thread in on the seam allowance.
Oh, interesting.
I don't actually cut it. I let it, and then I tuck
just
it
weave
in.
it into it.
Right.
Oh.
And then I cover any excess with the binding whenever I keep going.
Do you find that keeps it stronger?
I just don't want that knot to work itself out, and I feel like that extra thread length will keep it from doing that.
Gotcha.
Now, another really interesting thing is I don't tend to use a thimble, and I hear that you do.
That's true. Yes. So I didn't used to like thimbles at all because I have very tiny fingers, and so none of them ever fit. They were just metal ones that would fall off. But we do have clover thimbles here, and they're like a silicone with a metal tip. And so they kind of suction to your finger, so you can move around and they don't fall off your finger.
Okay.
And we have them in multiple sizes. So we have small, medium, and large.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. And did you find that when you first started working with a thimble, it was awkward, and then as you worked with it, it got easier and easier?
Yeah. It took a lot of getting used to. Also, before I didn't really know much about thimbles either. I would put it on my pointer finger, and I found that was very awkward. So I started putting it on my middle finger, and that meant that I didn't rub my finger on the needle or anything, and it felt more secure and also out of my way at the same time.
That's good.
So
that's interesting. Okay. I just never got used to using a thimble, so I've always just used my fingers. Maybe they're just tough. I don't know.
Hey, you got guitar players get calluses on their fingers?
We have quilter's finger.
Yeah. They're strong.
Yeah, they're strong. So another thing that you mentioned to me earlier was that instead of straight pins, you use clips.
Yeah, so I use these quilter's clips, and I do a very similar thing to you as kind of moving them along. I only use 2, but I've even started doing it slightly different. So I'd clip my 2 on, I'd pull it over and clip it. I'm not doing a very good job because I'm just doing it real fast. And then I'd clip this.
Okay.
Then when I'm sewing, I'll sew, get to my clip, and I'll just take it out and put it to the side. I keep my sewing box next to me, and I put it in there, and I'll sew to the next clip, and I'll take it out. And then I'll flip over my next bit of binding, clip it, and then clip the next.
Okay.
But I think that Donna hopscotches hers. And so it's just kind of a preference thing. I found that I was more efficient and I was quicker when I just took them and put them to the side because I could get a whole bunch done and then come back.
Yeah.
So that's, that's a preference thing.
Well, I think it's so cool how I've seen your binding. You do beautiful binding.
Thank you.
And we all have a different style and how we've kind of settled in and done it. And I've just kind of over the years developed my preferences and how I like to do it.
Yeah.
And you've got your preferences on how you like to do it. And I think that's great. I think whatever works, as long as your bindings turn out, I think that that's the most important thing.
Exactly. It doesn't matter how you got there, just that you got there.
Yep. And so whenever I bind, I like to watch movies. What do you like to do?
I also like to watch movies. I take up, honestly, basically the whole couch. I sit on the couch with my feet up on the table, and I have my sewing box next to me, and I have, my remotes on the other side of me, and I just sit there and sew and watch.
And there's usually a cat somewhere in the vicinity.
Yes, almost always.
Almost
You can't
always.
bind in our house without a cat jumping up, trying to eat your thread, wanting to sleep in your lap.
That's true.
Always
That's
getting
true.
angry when you have to move the quilt because they're sitting right where you're sewing.
We love them.
You do. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Well, let us know what kind of things you like to do while you bind, whether you listen to books on tape or Audible movies or whatever, or watch Fabric Cafe YouTube videos.
Oh, yeah.
That would be great. Okay, so we're good with binding.
Yeah.
It's time to go turn on that movie and
then I'll bring it all on back when it's all done, and I'll show you the final result.
I'm very excited. You've done just a fantastic job.
Thank you. I'm very excited. I'm going to start it tonight.
All right.
Okay, Fran, I did it. Are you ready to see it?
Yes, I am so excited to see it.
The completed quilt, binding all done. Ta-da!
Oh, Hannah, it's gorgeous. It is just
you.
amazing.
Now, I think I need to, are you coming over?
I just want to look because I just think you've done such a great job. I wanted to peek at the front. I just love how the colors are here. And the green really pops. It is just so gorgeous. Now, can we see the back too?
Yeah, that's what I was wanting to do. Like great minds think alike,
Okay, I think the back is gorgeous as the front. I love this fabric that you chose for the back. It is just striking all on its own. And the quilting looks amazing too. So thanks to Lucinda for that.
Yeah, I love it. I love that she did green on the front and then gray on the back because they would be the most complementary colors for each design.
Honestly, I didn't even notice until you pointed it out. That is really interesting. It is so neat. Yes. It is so gorgeous.
Yeah, I almost like the back more than the front.
Well, your front is amazing. So.
Well, and I really like that too. I like the front a lot, and then the back is just, it's got so many colors in it.
Right. So let's lay it back up on the table and everyone can see it. And tell me, so are there any things that you feel like you would do differently the next time around, or anything you learned that you'd like to share?
Well, I could definitely see improvement from the first quilt to the second. It was a lot easier to make my pieces. The idea you shared with me that you kind of break up your tasks. So like cut pieces and then sew it and then press it. So you're not doing all of it at the same time. And I think that is a fun thing because I did that a little bit towards the end, but I didn't do that when I was pressing all my blocks open, and I felt like I was doing it forever.
Yes, I kind of feel like that too, and that's part of the reason why I would kind of break it up as well, because, well, and it gets you up out of your chair and you get a little stretch, and so it really
you're not
does
just stuck.
Kind of help.
Yeah, and I think that helps you to not get on autopilot, because I think it's very easy to, you're just sewing along and you don't even think about it, and I think, you could get into mistakes. Even seasoned quilters, it's very easy.
You just kind of get in this little mesmerized groove there.
Yeah.
Well, very fun. Well, I just think you did a fantastic job, and I can't wait to hear how it's received by the recipient.
Thank
so
you.
I'm very excited about that.
I think she'll like it.
Yep, and for all of you out there, if you have not watched the whole series, be sure to go and start at the beginning.
Yeah.
And watch every step of the way of Hannah making her quilt.
Yeah.
And also be sure to like the videos, subscribe, and hit the little bell button, and that will notify you whenever a new video comes out each time with Fabric Cafe.
Yeah. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.